Hello everyone! So today I'm back telling you about the Hittite Empire, and today I want to tell you how the Hittite nation became the first constitutional monarchy back in the year 1460 before Christ. And it's really interesting because we usually know that the Greeks who lived in this direction were like the founders of democracy, right? And obviously, well, nobody cares too much about the founders of monarchy because like everybody did that, but the Hittites were the founders of constitutional monarchy, and it happened a long time ago. It would take literally millennia for another constitutional monarchy to arise anywhere on earth. And so let's see how that happened. Our story begins actually with the founding of the Hittite nation. The Hittite nation was founded by a legendary king called Labarna, or at least that's, yeah, well, this is not how they wrote it. They had their own writing system, but they called him Labarna. Labarna arrived, we don't know from where. There are some, actually, I'll tell you that story some other day. They came from either in this direction or this direction. And Labarna started conquering some cities in this area, and he became very important. And then Labarna was succeeded by, we don't know if this was his son, but it was definitely his relative, perhaps the son of his sister, and his name was Hattusili I. And I actually have about a video about Hattusili III, who lived several centuries afterwards. He's a really interesting person, the first person who wrote an autobiography. I'm gonna put the links. I'm gonna put an iCard right here, and then I'm gonna put some links at the end. But anyway, so Hattusili I was king. Well, by this time, this was not the Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire was something like this in this area. But Hattusili I started conquering cities in this direction. They specifically want to conquer this city, Aleppo, which still exists to this day. It is the capital of Syria, and it is a very important city today, and it was a very important city back then. But turns out that Hattusili couldn't take the city of Aleppo, and so he came back to the capital of Hattusa, and he came back wounded, mortally wounded. He was definitely going to die. And so he was in his deathbed, making all the preparations for finally dying. And here's something very interesting happened. We are not sure exactly what, but his nephew was also called Labarna. So let me make another layer so that we can know who were all the players in this thing, because it gets interesting. So we had Hattusili, and Hattusili I was the king, and then his heir was Labarna, and Labarna was his nephew. This would be Labarna II. Do not confuse with the first Labarna, the one that founded the kingdom. But anyway, so Hattusili sees that his nephew is very uncaring. Actually, well, what happened is that Hattusili at some point tells to a scribe, come here and write what I'm gonna say. And he starts saying, and it is written, it is in first person, and we have it. It's really interesting, and it says that I am hurt that my heir Labarna did not share a single tear when he saw me. He doesn't care, and like it's funny because it is so honest. He's just saying this guy, my nephew, my heir, the one who is gonna take my place as king, sees that I'm dying, and he doesn't care. He doesn't even cry, and then he starts describing how Labarna and his sister, and we don't know the name of the sister, but the mother of Labarna, the mom. Perhaps I should. Well. You can read it, right? It's the mom. So Labarna and his mom, and then his daughter, and some other of his children, like all of this family close to him, are like plotting something. Like they are plotting what they are gonna do as soon as he dies. And so apparently, I mean, in his own words, he says that they are plotting snakes and that they are wailing like cows. Like he insults them a lot, but and here's the thing: Hattusili is not very explicit about what is going on, but there is clearly some kind of political plot, and he discovers that all these people, his daughter, his nephew, his sister, and probably some other people in his family, are plotting to do something then the instant he dies. And he doesn't like it. He says that they are going to kill the people of Hatti. Hatti or Hattusa was the capital. They are going to hurt the people and they are going to kill. And so, but he's not very explicit about what is it they are planning. But whatever it is, he doesn't let them do it. And instead, he goes to the son of Lavarna, his grandson, Mursili I. Well, actually, spoiler, Mursili. And he tells that Mursili is now his heir, that when he dies, and it's going to be very soon, Mursili is going to be the king, not his father Lavarna. And he starts in this document that we have written in first person, he calls all the army, and he calls the guards of the palace, he calls all the royal servants, and all the people involved in the bureaucracy, everyone involved in running the nation, and he tells them, you gotta serve Mursili. Mursili is the king. If you are loyal to me, you will be loyal to him. Ignore all these other people. My sister, my nephew, my daughter, all of them, ignore them. Mursili is the king. And he actually places all these people in house arrest. And I love it. This is so amazing because it is just so honest, you know? Like, if you read documents from Egypt or from Assyria or even the Romans, they are so grandiose. They are, for example, the Egyptians are always saying how they are divine, how they are always connected to the gods, and in all these ancient writings, all these royal people are always saying how they are better than everyone else, and how they are semi-divine or they are gods and stuff like that. But this document is very honest. It is just a guy who sees that his family is up to no good and he's disappointed in them, and he appoints someone else to the throne that he thinks can do a better job. And he mentions gods only once. He only mentions gods only when he says that the gods would not allow him to place Mursili in the throne if Mursili wasn't worthy. He says it with some other words. But yeah, and so it's very honest. I really like it about the Hittites. They didn't. This is not propaganda, because all these other writings that I'm mentioning of the Egyptians and the Romans and the Syrians, they were always made with propaganda in mind. But here, no. I mean, it's just Hattusili literally saying what's on his mind, plain and simple. Actually, he says, I liked at some point, he says, they do not love Hatti. That's what they call their nation. They do not love Hatti, and I love it, and Mursili loves it. So there is this sense of patriotism. He's not even appealing to divinity or to superiority. He's just saying who will be a better ruler for the people of our nation, and it will be Mursili. And it worked, because Mursili did indeed become the king, Mursili I. And actually he continued the campaigns of his uncle, and he eventually did conquer the city of Aleppo. And actually the Hittites governed the city of Aleppo for many centuries. And actually the Egyptians did several wars to try to take the city of Aleppo from them, but they were never able to. And so, well, that's very interesting. But this is all about how this left the constitutional monarchy. I'm getting there. And so we have this guy, Mursili I. And Mursili I does a bunch of things. He conquers a bunch of stuff. And then eventually he one day comes back to Hattusa. Hattusa is over here. He comes back to Hattusa, and then he is murdered by his brother-in-law. And it's really sad, but it gets worse. Because beginning with Mursili I, I'm going to put a first here. Every Hittite king is murdered by someone else, and someone else takes the throne. And so you have fathers killing sons, and sons killing uncles, and the sisters also getting the fun. Like, you have the sisters and the wives and the mothers. Everyone is killing everyone else. There are many interesting stories in this period. but it's a mess. So I want to just skip all of that until we get to Telepinu. And yeah, the Hittites had very like I like Mursili. I like Mursili, I like Hattusili, but then they had names like Telepinu and Shupiluliuma. Literally, this guy, Shupiluliuma, one day I want to do a video about him. He was the most important Hittite king ever, Shupiluliuma. I don't know, it sounds like the name I would give to some kind of fluffy dog. Ooh, Shupiluliuma, come here, oh, good boy. But no, this was the most powerful man alive when he lived. Like, actually, there's a letter from the king of Egypt telling him to please take the throne of Egypt, for real. Anyway, the point is that here a bunch of bad things happens, all of the murders, and eventually we have Telepinu getting to the throne. And Telepinu does something very important, because Telepinu looks at all these things, like looks at all these people killing themselves for the throne, and he says, we have to stop this. And so what Telepinu does is that he creates, well, today we would call it a constitution. He didn't call it a constitution back then, but I mean, we read it and that's what it is. It is a constitution. But it is a very short constitution, but it does a lot. So this document first begins saying, people, all of this is wrong. So this is how we are going to do it. And so he creates the succession laws. Actually, succession is a very long word. I'm not going to write it all, but just succession laws. And he explains exactly how sons and daughters are going to precede their fathers in the throne. And actually, it just so happens that the laws he creates make it so that the succession remember that Labarna, the first Hittite king, was succeeded by Hattusili, and then Hattusili was succeeded by Mursili. And so these new succession laws make it so that this first succession of like the three first good kings they had would have been lawful under this. So I think he was using the past as inspiration. Like he looked at these examples of the past and he saw, like, for example, Hattusili was succeeded by the son of his daughter. Okay, so that's gonna be a lawful way to, because Labarna had no sons of his own, and so that's gonna be lawful here. And then he was like, well, Hattusili was gonna be succeeded by his nephew, the son of his daughter, which was lawful, but then his nephew and his mother were planning to plot people. Were plotting to kill people. And so he says, okay, so that automatically makes you lose the throne. If you plot to kill anyone, that makes you not a valid successor to the throne anymore. And so now, of course, Mursili would have been the one next in law, because his father lost his claim to the throne for wanting to kill people. And so, and well, the succession lines are more complex than that. He lists a lot of things about first rank and second rank heirs, and what if this is alive, what if this guy is alive, and what about their ages and stuff like that. And so he's thorough, and so he creates these succession laws. And he also, there was this thing called the Pangu. Okay, let me just check if it was indeed called the Pangu. Okay, so yeah, it was indeed called Pangu. And let's talk about the Pangu. So the Pangu seemingly already existed, but Telepinu just enshrined it into law. And he said the Pangu, and this is basically like a parliament made of members of the royal family. And he said the people in the Pangu, in the council, are going to be responsible for preventing the king or the princess or everyone in the royal family from killing each other. And if they discover that there are plots to kill people, or if there are plots that succeed in killing anyone in the royal family, then the Pangu, the council, has to capture those people and put them in trial. And this is interesting because he's saying that even the royal family, even the king, is not above the law. And so he's creating, like, we have the king, but then we have, that case was awful. So we have the king, but then there is this parliament that is, in some sense, below him, but also above him. They have authority over the king in some matters. And so the king is not above the law. So this is a constitution. So this is a constitutional monarchy. And the Pangu can put the king in trial and depose him and put someone else according to the succession laws. And so this is very interesting. And let me tell you, it did work. In the Hittite Empire, people could sue the king or the prince, and the prince could lose everything. They could go to jail. Actually, in the autobiography of Hattusili III, and don't confuse with Hattusili I, this is the third, Hattusili III, he actually, when he was prince, before his brother was the king, but he was sued by someone else in the royal family, not for plotting to murder anyone, but and it was some dispute about laws, and like this guy was claiming that Hattusili had him cursed or something, and cursing people like with magic, that was a crime because they were very superstitious. And actually Hattusili, in his autobiography that he wrote himself, he was very worried, and Hattusili describes going in front of the wheel. So apparently there was like this symbol of a god, and there would be this council that would sit in this table in front of the symbol of the wheel, and the accused would be in front of them, and then they would hear their case and everything. And Hattusili was the prince. His brother was the king, and Hattusili eventually became king himself, and he was put on trial. And he was very worried. Okay, eventually he won the trial, and actually eventually he sued this other guy, and eventually that guy was also part of the royal family, and that guy lost everything. He lost all his properties and stuff. And so, well, my point with all of this is that in the Hittite Empire was probably the first nation on earth where the royal family and the kings were not above the law. Actually, there was a Hittite queen who did go to trial, and she did lost everything. I think she ended up escaping. Well, that's a story for another day. But she was found guilty, and so this is amazing. This was a nation in which there had a constitution, the Telepinus Proclamation, and they had a parliament that enacted laws, and the king and not the king and everyone in the royal family were not above that law. And so this is a great example. This is the first time in human history when that happened. Of course, there were many republics shortly after them, like the Greeks and stuff, and the Roman Republic, and then there was the Roman Empire and stuff like that. But the next constitutional monarchy doesn't arise, I think, until the 1600s, almost like 3,000 years later. It would take so long for another nation to think like, hey, guys, you know what? Perhaps there should be no one above the law in any nation. Isn't that crazy? But the Hittites did it. The Hittites did it thousands of years ago, and it worked well for a long time. Actually, the only thing that could bring them down was the Bronze Age collapse, which is really sad. And that's a story for another day. Actually, a YouTube channel called Historia Civilis did a video about that, but he has a lot. You guys probably already know about him. If not, I'm gonna put the link in the description anyway. But yeah, so this is the Hittite Empire, and this is how the Hittites became the first constitutional monarchy ever. Also, I'm gonna put some links in the description about where you can read Telepinus Proclamation and where you can read some other Hittite texts. Some of them are not available for free, but let me know if you're interested in them, and I can give them to you if you want. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching.